Imagine yourself standing in a courtroom. The judge strikes the gavel and demands, "Prove that God exists using only reason. No appeals to faith." How would you respond? In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas faced this very challenge. Instead of relying on religious doctrine, he used pure logic to construct 5 rational arguments that, in his view, demonstrated the existence of God. These arguments became known as the 5 ways. But do they still hold up in the era of modern science? What do they truly prove? Today, we delve into the mind of one of history's greatest thinkers, examining one by one the 5 rational proofs for the existence of God. Who was St. Thomas Aquinas? In the 13th century, a quiet young man lived, a thinker with deep contemplative eyes, always observing the world around him. In the classroom, while his peers engaged in loud debates, he remained silent, lost in profound thought. His teachers, mistaking his quiet nature for dullness, nicknamed him the dumb ox. What they failed to see was that within him an extraordinary intellect was forming, one that would forever shape philosophy and theology. That young man was Thomas Aquinas, and ironically the one they considered dumb would become one of the most influential minds in human history. Born around 1225 in Italy to a noble family, Thomas displayed an early passion for study. His parents, eager for him to secure a prestigious career, sent him to be educated by Benedictine monks. But Thomas had other aspirations. Instead of following the path set by his family, he chose to join the Dominican order, a decision that enraged his relatives. So fiercely did they oppose his choice that they kidnapped and imprisoned him for a year, hoping to change his mind. Yet nothing could break his determination. During his captivity, Thomas only deepened his studies. Once freed, he resumed his religious path with even greater conviction. His brilliance quickly became undeniable. He pursued his studies in Paris and Cologne, guided by Albertus Magnus, one of the greatest minds of the time. It was under his mentorship that Thomas Aquinas refined his ideas that would leave a lasting imprint on philosophy, theology, and the intellectual tradition of the world. Thomas Aquinas developed his first rational argument for the existence of God, known as the unmoved mover. This concept was built upon the ideas of Aristotle, who had already observed that everything in motion is moved by something else. But this raises a critical dilemma. If every movement is caused by something else, what caused the very first movement? Imagine a long line of dominoes, each one falling and knocking over the next. But what caused the first domino to fall? Without an initial push, the chain of movements would never have begun. Similarly, if everything in the universe moves only because something else set it in motion, and there is no starting point, then motion could never have begun. This leads to 2 possibilities. Either there is an infinite chain of movement with no first mover, or there is a first mover, something that initiated everything without itself being moved. The idea of an infinite chain of causes and effects may seem appealing, but according to Aquinas, it doesn't work. If there were an infinite regression of movements, we would never arrive at a point where motion began. Yet we know that motion exists. This means there must be something that initiated motion, something that didn't depend on anything else to start moving. Think of a train with an infinite number of cars. Each car moves because the one in front of it pulls it forward, but without a locomotive at the front, the train would never move at all. The first mover is essential for any movement to happen. But what could this first mover be? It can't be anything physical, because every physical object needs something else to move it. This first mover must be something immaterial, eternal, and self-sufficient. Thomas Aquinas identifies this first mover as God. Centuries later, Newtonian physics showed that an object in motion can remain in motion without continuous force as long as no resistance is present. However, this doesn't answer the question of how motion began in the first place. Today, many scientists believe the universe began with the Big Bang, But this only raises a new question. What caused the Big Bang? What was the spark that ignited that initial cosmic explosion? Some theories, like the multiverse hypothesis, suggest that universes are constantly emerging from one another, yet even this leads to the same question. What was the origin of everything? No matter how advanced science becomes, the question of the first mover remains unanswered. The first cause. An unanswered question. Imagine walking into a brightly lit room and wondering what is responsible for lighting up the space. You notice a light bulb glowing and ask, what makes this bulb shine? Upon further inspection, you realize the bulb is connected to a wire, which in turn is connected to a power grid. But what if all these sources of energy were merely relays passing along power from somewhere else? At some point, there must be a primary source of energy, a power plant that generates all the electricity, making the bulb glow. In a similar way, everything in the universe operates like that light bulb. It depends on something else for its existence. However, if we trace these dependencies backward far enough, we must eventually reach a supreme source of existence, a source that does not depend on anything else, but from which everything else emanates. According to Aquinas, this ultimate source is God. Our world operates in a chain of causes and effects. If you see smoke, you know there must be fire. If a window is broken, something or someone must have caused it. In other words, nothing happens without a reason. Aquinas argued that this principle applies to everything in the universe. Nothing can cause itself. This means that everything that exists must have been caused by something prior to it. But then we face a dilemma. Either this chain of causes goes on infinitely with no starting point, or there must be a first cause, something that began everything without being caused by anything else. If we assume that every event or object in the universe is the result of something else, with no first cause, we fall into the trap of infinite regress. This presents a logical problem. Imagine you're waiting for a friend to lend you a book. Your friend tells you he needs to borrow it from someone else. That person, in turn, needs to get it from another, and so on, endlessly. The result? You never get the book. Similarly, if everything in existence needs a prior cause and there's no original starting point, nothing would ever have come into being. But we know the universe exists. Therefore, there must be a first cause, something that initiated everything and doesn't require a cause itself. Today, cosmology supports the idea that the universe had a beginning, with the Big Bang being the most widely accepted theory explaining the origin of the cosmos. But this raises another question. What caused the Big Bang? Some theories propose that the universe emerged from quantum fluctuations in a vacuum. However, even the quantum vacuum is something. It exists, and it cannot be the cause of itself. So the question remains, what was the first cause? Other theories attempt to address this problem by suggesting that the universe is eternal. However, this only shifts the question, what keeps the universe in existence? No matter how much science advances, it still doesn't answer the core question Aquinas raised. Why is there something rather than nothing? Aquinas argued that everything that exists has a cause. Since an infinite chain of causes is impossible, there must be a first cause, something that exists independently and brings everything else into being. Aquinas identified this first cause with God. The necessary being. On a starry night, when you gaze up at the sky, you are struck by the vastness of the universe. Everything around you, from the distant stars to the smallest leaf on a tree, seems fleeting, here only for a moment before vanishing. All things are born, grow, and eventually fade away. But if everything is temporary, how is it that anything exists at all? Thomas Aquinas recognized that everything in the universe is contingent, meaning that its existence is not guaranteed. Things in the universe depend on other things to come into being, and they require certain conditions to continue to exist. You exist because your parents existed before you. A tree grows because it has sunlight, water, and fertile soil. Stars shine because nuclear fusion takes place inside them. Nothing in the universe can explain its own existence. Everything relies on something else. And therein lies the problem. If everything depends on something else for its existence, and every cause is supported by something prior, we face the same dilemma again. Can this chain of dependencies stretch back infinitely, or must there be something that doesn't depend on anything else to exist? If there were no being that existed by its very nature, then at some point in the past there would have been nothing at all. And if there was ever a moment when nothing existed, then nothing could have ever come into being, because from nothing, nothing comes. But we know the universe exists, so there must be something that has always existed, something that didn't require anything else to begin its existence. This is what Thomas Aquinas called the necessary being. Unlike everything else in the universe, this being cannot not exist, because its existence doesn't depend on anything else. It is the foundational cause, the bedrock upon which all reality is built. If the universe were made only of contingent beings, its existence would be like a chain suspended in midair, with no point of support. But if there is a necessary being, that chain is upheld, because there is an absolute foundation sustaining everything. This necessary being cannot be material, because material things are subject to change and time. It must exist outside the limits of physicality, enduring and self-sustaining, eternal and unchanging. It also cannot be limited, because anything that has limits must rely on something external to define those boundaries. This being must be immutable, eternal, and independent. Thomas Aquinas identifies this being as God. Modern science, while offering various theories about the origins of the universe, still cannot explain why there is something rather than nothing. The Big Bang theory may describe how the universe evolved from an initial state, but it does not answer why that initial state existed in the first place. Theories involving multiverses or cosmic cycles attempt to push the question even further back, yet in the end, the most fundamental question remains: why does anything exist at all? Thomas Aquinas would argue that the answer does not lie in another event within the universe, but rather outside of it, in something that is necessary by its very nature. The universe, along with everything within it, can be likened to shadows cast by a fundamental light. This light does not depend on anything else to shine, it simply is. For Aquinas, that light is the perfect being, God. Now, imagine walking into a dark room. Slowly, as your eyes adjust, you begin to make out the shape of an object. At first, it appears incomplete, a vague silhouette. But as the light intensifies, the contours become clearer. Gradually, the object reveals itself in full detail. What once seemed uncertain and imperfect now appears well-defined and clear. The light illuminating it allows you to see it as it truly is, in all its fullness. However, even though the object is now revealed in all its detail, no matter how well lit, it still bears the mark of limitation. It is not absolute, not eternal, and is subject to change or decay over time. Thomas Aquinas observed that everything in the universe exhibits varying degrees of perfection. Whether it's beauty, goodness, knowledge, or any other quality, there is always a hierarchy. Some things are more beautiful, more good, or more perfect than others. Yet none of them is truly perfect in itself. Everything is subject to flaws, limitations, and the passage of time. A tree may be beautiful, but its beauty is temporary and vulnerable to age and decay. A person may be good, but human goodness is always relative, because human nature is inherently imperfect. These observations lead to a profound reflection on the concept of perfection. Does something truly perfect exist? Something that transcends the limitations and deficiencies we see in contingent things? If there is a gradation of perfections, then there must be something beyond them all, something that is absolutely perfect, without flaws, unchanging and eternal. It must be something that cannot be improved, cannot become better, and is already complete in every possible way. Thomas Aquinas concluded that such a perfect being must exist, for it serves as the standard by which we recognize and measure all other forms of perfection. According to Aquinas, this being is God. In his reasoning, Aquinas relies on the idea that if we perceive a hierarchy of qualities, wisdom, goodness, beauty, there must be a maximum, a supreme standard by which these qualities are judged. This ultimate perfection cannot simply be an abstract concept or a vague idea in our minds. It must possess real, concrete existence. Only the existence of a perfect being can justify our very concept of perfection. This perfect being cannot be constrained by time or space, for any limitation would imply imperfection. It cannot be conditioned by anything external, for that would make it dependent. Therefore, it must be necessary, eternal, simple, and absolutely perfect in its essence. It cannot change, for change implies the loss or gain of perfection. Anything that can be altered was never truly perfect to begin with. According to Thomas Aquinas, this perfect being is God. God is the source of all the qualities we perceive in the universe: beauty, goodness, wisdom, and order. Yet in God these qualities exist in their purest and fullest form, without flaw or limitation. If the universe reflects these qualities, it is because everything that exists depends on the perfection of God, who is the source of all goodness and harmony within the cosmos. For Aquinas, our pursuit of perfection, this chapter invites us to reflect on our constant search for something greater, something that transcends the material world. This longing is not just a human trait, but rather a sign that the perfect being exists, upholding the universe with absolute perfection. For Thomas Aquinas, the perfect being is God, whose presence is the very source and reason behind all the order, beauty, and goodness we perceive. By recognizing this divine perfection, we can begin to understand the intimate relationship between Creator and creation, between the absolute and the contingent. The Supreme Intelligence. Imagine yourself walking through a forest and coming across a watch lying among the leaves. You pick it up and start examining it closely. You notice how the hands of the watch move with perfect precision, how every gear inside is intricately positioned, all working together in harmony to keep time. Naturally, you wouldn't assume that the watch appeared by accident, formed randomly from sticks and leaves. On the contrary, its structure and functionality point clearly to a watchmaker, someone who designed and assembled each part with a distinct purpose. Now, consider the universe. It is far more complex than any watch, governed by laws of immense precision that control everything from the movement of planets to the chemical reactions within a single cell. The seasons follow a predictable pattern. The human heart beats in a regulated rhythm. Light travels through a vacuum, adhering to immutable mathematical constants. How could such order exist without a directing intelligence behind it? Thomas Aquinas observed that nature operates in accordance with these ordered and harmonious principles. Yet, he also recognized that the natural elements themselves have no awareness or understanding to organize themselves in such a way. Plants don't decide to grow toward the sun, planets don't choose to orbit stars, and birds didn't invent seasonal migration. Yet all of these processes follow intelligible, objective patterns. How is this possible? For Aquinas, the only reasonable explanation is the existence of a supreme intelligence behind it all, a rational principle that directs the order of the universe. Just as an arrow shot through the air requires an archer to aim it, the universe needs an intellect to guide and sustain it. If the universe were merely the result of pure chance, there would be no reason for its laws to remain constant. However, The laws of physics and mathematics remain unchanged over time. Gravity attracts objects in the same way everywhere in the cosmos. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. The structure of DNA follows a precise code. This level of order and predictability suggests something more than mere randomness. It points toward rational design. This is the essence of Aquinas' fifth way. The existence of order and purpose in the universe points to an intelligent being who arranged it. This being cannot be limited like us because limitation implies ignorance or imperfection. It must be the very source of all intelligence, the ultimate reason for why everything works in such harmony. For Thomas Aquinas, this being is God. Even with all the precision and complexity of the natural world, only an intelligent force could have orchestrated such perfect order. Despite the impressive advances of modern science, the fundamental question of why the universe exists as it does remains a source of deep fascination. The Big Bang Theory offers an explanation for the expansion of the universe, but it does not answer the more profound question of why the laws of physics exist in the form they do. While genetic mutations may occur randomly, the existence of the genetic code itself, along with its complexity and efficiency, remains a mystery. Evolution can account for how species adapt, but it doesn't explain why nature itself is capable of such coherent organization. Some suggest that the order of the universe might have arisen by pure chance. However, the very concept of chance only makes sense within a system that is already ordered. Chance may explain specific events within the context of the cosmos, but it fails to account for the existence of the cosmos itself. Thus, for Thomas Aquinas, the only reasonable conclusion is that a supreme intelligence sustains all of reality. This intelligence did not merely create the universe, but continues to uphold it, ensuring that order and harmony are preserved, preventing them from descending into chaos. God is not just the creator, but the great architect, maintaining every law, process, and detail in perfect balance. Aquinas' fifth way encourages us to view the cosmos with new eyes, not as a meaningless accident, but as a masterpiece crafted by an infinite mind. By recognizing this supreme intelligence, we begin to understand that the pursuit of knowledge and truth is not just a human curiosity, but a reflection of the divine rationality that permeates all of creation. Through his 5 ways, Thomas Aquinas urges us to reflect deeply on the existence of God through pure reason. He does not call for blind faith, but rather appeals to logic and the careful observation of the world around us. From the movement of the stars to the intrinsic order of nature, from the necessity of a first cause to the existence of a perfect being, each argument leads to the same conclusion. There is something beyond the physical universe, something eternal, necessary, and intelligent that sustains everything that exists. That being, the ultimate source of reality, is what we call God. Even centuries after his time, Aquinas' ideas continue to challenge both believers and skeptics alike as they address the very core of existence and human understanding. If this exploration into the mind of Thomas Aquinas has sparked your curiosity, don't stop here. Continue to explore his works, delve into the dialogues between philosophy and science, and keep questioning. The search for truth is an intellectual and spiritual adventure that never ends. Share this knowledge, engage in conversation, and reflect on these profound questions. And if you wish to dive even deeper, keep following our content. After all, understanding the structure of reality is an essential step toward understanding ourselves.